to the MMA Fan Podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Stu and Blake.
Hello and welcome to the MMA Fan Show. I am Blake Harrison and joining me as ever is Stuart Whiffen.
How are you? You all right?
Yeah, I'm all right.
You went a little French towards the end of Whiffen.
Merci beaucoup.
Well, you were speaking French before we pressed record, so
I was, yeah.
Very much. I don't know where this Frenchness has come from. It's got absolutely nothing to do with today's episode or guest.
Zero. So let's move on. We have got a special guest with us today, a long-time friend of the show, a guy that hasn't been in the new studio yet.
No.
But we're glad to welcome in. It's Scroobius Pip.
Hello, guys. How's
You
it going? It's lovely here.
Thanks,
Look at
mate.
this.
I know.
It's all right, isn't it?
And obviously, when we set it up, we was like, well, you live up the road,
Yeah.
and you're our pal. So it was like, at some point, we got to get Pip in.
Yeah.
And when I mentioned to you, did you want to come in and do a pre-fight show or a post-fight show? You said that you wanted to try something different. So tell us what you want to talk about today.
Well, we talked about a few different things of doing, as you guys did the other week, top 3 fights of all time, which, again, Blake, I'm so sorry you had to go through that.
There were some weird ones, right?
Ronda Holly is just a bizarre choice for top fight shock of all time. Sure, fight of.
Why has everyone got problems
what
with
a
this?
strange
Because it's
man.
objectively not even the best. I said this on the show. Objectively, the best female fight is Zhang Joanna 1.
Yeah.
So to pick Holly and Ronda over that, on top of over like so many other fights, it was a weird one. But
It was strange, but I thought about that, and again, we'd looked at some pre-shows, but it didn't happen. And you'd mentioned picking my favourite fighter of all time, so I thought, well, let's do that. Now that he's retired as well, it's Robbie Lawler, the ruthless one.
yes,
Absolutely.
what a man.
And so we have no idea how this episode's going to go. We've
Yeah.
not kind of said to you, how do you want to play this? So are you literally just going to talk about what you love about him, where you kind of discovered him? And
I brought some props along because
Lovely.
I did want to get the history of it in there, because the start of my history with Robbie Lawler was, so I used to work in HMV for years, and when HMV started doing the UFC, I was a wrestling fan, and they started doing UFC DVDs, and I looked at that front cover and I was like, what the hell is this sport? So I bought this. Is the first one that I bought. A
For
UFC
anyone that's
40.
not watching, it's UFC Vendetta. Who's on the front cover?
Tito and Ken Shamrock just looking like villains from Kickboxer or some other Van Damme
They
film.
do. They really do.
Proper Van Damme style villains. So I got this, and the first fight on this is Robbie Lawler against Tiki. So my first ever MMA fight I saw properly, other than clips of the old stuff, was Lawler v Tiki. And it was amazing. You see this young lad, and in Robbie Lawler, who's young, he's got hair at that point. He looks like a bit of a savage.
I would put a picture of Robbie Lawler with hair up on the screen. However, you try and find pictures on the internet of Robbie that you can blow up nice and big with hair. There isn't any.
It was, again, I'm sure the DVD on a good TV is probably pixelated as anything, because it was pre all of that. It was 20 or 2002. And Tiki had like bits bleached or shaved in his beard, so he had a shaved head and looked, again, they both looked like kind of characters from films. Then Robbie came out and just was throwing like Mike Tyson, and I realised that I think the thing that got me into MMA really was a missed punch, because Robbie knocks Tiki down, then on the mat he lands one punch that opens this hole in his head, and then the next punch he throws that hits the mat, I'm pretty sure would have ended the sport if it had landed, because it would have killed Tiki.
You can hear it.
The
You can
thud
hear
of
the
that
thud of it on
punch
the
was just
mat.
like you've got one that cuts him open and it's brutal and it's astounding. The kind of thing that gets you into MMA first, because you do normally come first for the violence and this and that. Then you grow to just love the technical side of it and the sportsmanship and all of this, all the beautiful things. But the first thing that draws you in is, oh my God, are these guys just beating the crap out of each other? So yeah, this punch that cut this hole in Tiki's head. And that was kind of the start of it, of the love affair with Robbie Lawler specifically, and MMA. It was that kind of thing that got me into it.
I just have to point something out. That was, you were talking about the fight with Tiki Ghosn. Robbie Lawler was only 6-0 at that point. It shows how early he started his UFC career, because he made his UFC debut at UFC High Impact when he was only 4-0. But I have to just point out that before the Tiki Ghosn fight, he fought a guy called Steve Berger, and the title of the UFC event was UFC 37.5, as real as it gets.
I wish they still done names like that. That's so good.
Imagine what the names would be at 297. They're still having to come up with things. Yeah, I mean, this one, UFC 40, was Vendetta. So, in fact, the next DVD that he was on it's on. So close to being its time. UFC 47, it's on. And again, yeah, he popped up on a load of these. So I kept kind of watching Robbie at that point. Including, I think it's that one. Is it at 47 he fought Nick Diaz?
Yes, yeah. I've literally got the record.
And that was amazing because I was like, this skinny, mouthy nerd is about to get destroyed by my hero. And then Diaz was amazing and beat him. Because again, the start of that is the first time we've seen Diaz kind of talking crap, mouthing off, posing, all sorts of stuff. And at this point, like, Robbie Lawler is my absolute, this guy's the most, he's going to be the champ. He's so young, but he's destroying people. And
I guess he got his revenge, but not in the most exciting of fashion, really, was it? I think that one come a little bit too late for Nick Diaz. So was that something like that your love of MMA really grew out of? I mean, you've got a stack of DVDs in front of us here.
Well, there's all the ones I don't have here are the ones I couldn't afford, so I just took the DVD home when the store closed, watched it, then popped it back in the box the next day.
So it didn't have the plastic covering on it.
Just kind of pop that in my pocket, pop that in the next day. There you go. I've watched that because, you know, retail doesn't pay great. So, But yeah, that was exactly it. That's where it all started. It was me and a few mates would go, like, it was my first mates to move out of home, who had their own place. We'd go around there with the newest UFC DVD.
It's weird, isn't it?
And watch it and love it.
Because it feels, at that point, I was also going into HMV and buying UFC DVDs.
Yeah.
And it still felt a little bit like you buying a pirate video. It was like, this is really crazy. I can't believe what I'm watching on here. Along
the same shelf as these was like the 5 porn DVDs that you could buy in HMV. So it's literally, it goes porn, then UFC, then WWE. That was like the levels of what
the downward kind of progression or degradation.
Each of them comes in a brown paper bag rather than a clear plastic bag. The embarrassment of them.
How many of those did you take home with you?
Again,
the shop shut.
Popped them back when it opened. No further questions, Your Honour.
No. Did Robbie Lawler ever do an
DVD? Not that I know of.
Not that I know.
He didn't, did he?
I don't think so.
Because I think one of the things that we should talk about is he's kind of Robbie Lawler, sort of celebrity Robbie Lawler as a person, not as a fighter, because he's a man of quite few words, right?
Yeah. Again, it's one of the things that's I love about him is there's been a lot of favourite MMA fighters over the years who've ruined it for me by then speaking their minds. Again, as social media came about and podcasts came about, you'll then have Cerrone dropping F-bombs, things like that people who I'm really excited about and into, that then I'm like, I can't enjoy you in the same way. And his kind of mentor, Matt Hughes, was another one who kind of came out as quite a kind of gun-toting America's American kind of thing. But Robbie's always kept himself to himself and just let his fighting do the talking. And yeah, that's a beautiful thing. He's probably got some horrible views, but he has the good manners to keep them away from my ears so I can still enjoy him.
And I think that's testament to how exciting a fighter he is.
Yeah, he doesn't need to.
His fight style markets the fights. He doesn't have to be like Conor. You know, he doesn't have
never
to
been the
kind
trash
of
talker.
No,
Yeah.
you never really. I mean, don't get me wrong. On the stare downs, he always seemed quite involved in that, but it was never anything other than staring into his eyes. And
it's
I'm
his
not being
general
funny.
aura.
Yeah, if
Yeah.
Robbie Lawler's staring into your eyes, that's a terrifying enough prospect. He doesn't need to say anything or do anything else. I think, you know, when as this podcast unfolds a bit more and we look at some other images of him, he's a very terrifying man.
Yeah, but he's just got something a superstar about him.
Yeah.
He's got that look and that style in there. And again, like, so just to continue on, he lost 3 fights in a row in the UFC and went over and was one of the first people in Elite XC. And again, it made me realise that I was a Robbie Lawler fan rather than just a UFC fan, because I was buying Elite XC Uprising, where he became the middleweight champion against Ninja Hua, Shogun's brother. And then through Strikeforce as well, fighting people like Jake Shields and
Did he lose to Jake Shields?
He lost to Shields, but he beat people like Melvin Manhoof and just some real striking.
That Melvin Manhoof one was phenomenal, because Melvin was all over him. Like, he was lining up, kicking the legs, really dominating him. And then out of nowhere, he dropped. I don't know if it was a right hook or I can't remember, but he absolutely slept him. And it looked like he was done with one punch, but he still obviously, in Robbie Lawler fashion, got that follow-up shot in.
He got a few more in, yeah, exactly.
But it's just even better. There's so many exciting fights and amazing moments. Like you mentioned, he's 6-0 fighting Tiki Gosen, and he almost punches through the mat.
Yeah.
Then you've got that one with Melvin Manhoof where you're like, this is one-way traffic, and then boom, out of nowhere.
And that was exciting as well, because that was certainly a period, again, kind of pre-social media and YouTube becoming what they became. You'd just heard of Melvin Manhoof. You maybe had seen one or two of his brutal knockouts. You may have heard Rogan starting to talk about him or something like that, but you just heard of this brutal killer kickboxer. And then as it's going along, he's beating up his legs. You're like, wow, we've never seen someone just attack the legs in such a manner. I like when Gaethje came into the UFC, and it's the first time you're going, oh my God, he doesn't have to land a punch. He can just end this with kicks. That's what Melvin Manhoof was like. And then Robbie just plants him, and
It's interesting just looking through his record here that in 2005 he comes off of a three-fight win streak in Icon Sport. I'm not sure what. I don't remember too much about that organisation. And then re-signs to the UFC. Loses his first 2 when he comes back. No, that couldn't have been when he comes back. That's got to be first time round when he fought Diaz.
Yeah, that's the first time round.
Yeah. So he come back in. Let's get this right here. What was his first fight back?
His first fight back was Josh Koscheck, who everyone hated at the time, and he just smashed him in the head. So that was, again, a wonderful comeback, having, as I said, been the Elite XC champ, had an up and down career in Strikeforce, had wins and losses. He'd beaten some good people. He'd lost to some really good people.
Well, just even look at Tim Kennedy, Jacare Souza.
Strikeforce.
Just so Jake Shields, as you mentioned, and then wins over Melvin Manhoof and people like that. That means it's such a mad career when you look back at it in this way, that like he started in the UFC at just, I think, 4-0, which is
and as
I know
kid,
with the contender,
as a young lad,
it was like 19 or 20 or something like that. And I know we're seeing a lot more of those kind of records now with contender series and stuff, maybe a 5-0, a 6-0 person can. I don't feel like you had this as much back then.
No.
And they were thrust into the deep end, into the really high caliber competition really, really early. And then clearly it was maybe a little bit too much too soon. Although maybe you could say that it was harsh that he was cut.
Well, back then
because
it was
he only got 2 losses. And Nick Diaz and Evan Tanner, who we all know of, and good fighters. And then that's it. After that, he's in Super Brawl and an Icon, as you mentioned, in different organisations
Stu
like that.
looks like such a confused dad over there. He's got his AA route finder out. He's finding the way as
He's stapled it all back to front.
Do you know what? I actually have.
Oh, wow.
No, just
what a rookie error.
Looking at the Terry went on after Koscheck, and obviously quite early on fought Rory in the first fight.
Oh, that's one of the main fights I wanted to talk about, because I think it gets really overlooked, the first one, because I think I remember being hugely excited about it, because as a huge Robbie fan and followed him through Strikeforce and that, he came back, beat Koscheck, he beat someone else, and then was fighting Rory in a title contender fight. Eliminator, and he was completely written off because Rory was the new GSP. He'd come in, like we were talking about Robbie coming in early. At that point, it was so based on the gyms you're at. So Robbie was a Militic, fought under Pat Militic, where Matt Hughes was from, and all these others. So that would get you in. And Rory, similar, was under GSP, under Faraz, Jackson, all this kind of thing. And
he was being, I mean, we spoke about him on a few shows back. He was being touted as the first MMA fighter, the complete MMA fighter that's not moved from a certain discipline. He's come round as a completely rounded.
And I liked him. I loved him. I've since had Rory on my podcast. He was just such an amazing dude to talk to, because he's so not an MMA fighter. He's such just a thoughtful, intelligent lad. But I loved Robbie at this point, and as I said, he was so written off, even on commentary, that it was kind of as if this is how Rory is getting his title shot. And then Robbie just persisted and kept coming at him and kept coming forward and kept landing and hurting. It was the first time you'd seen Rory look a bit shook and a bit panicked. And again, I think it really set up for their rematch, where both of them, you couldn't deny that they were warriors, because this was the first time that Rory felt like he'd got overwhelmed a bit. You know, his mind had got to him a bit, because he'd taken some strikes and punches, and Robbie just kept throwing and kept coming at him. And it wasn't a technical masterpiece, but he had such heart, and it got him the title shot. And that was,
but that seems
particularly at that point, like having been cut and then not had a flawless career outside, had win-loss. You kind of thought he's never going to get to that point in the UFC.
And Blake, who did he fight in that that title fight? Who was it?
Well, clearly Jimi Hendrix. Have you got a picture of Jimi?
I nearly put a picture of Jimi Hendrix in there, mate.
Johnny Hendrix. But the thing about Robbie is he seems to really thrive in the chaos of a fight. It seems to be like, I wouldn't be surprised if he finds life mundane unless he's fighting another human being. Because in the Johnny Hendrix fight, and then I think in others as well, you see him lose a round and get kind of, well beaten within that round. And he's smiling. He goes back to his corner just smiling like, I love this. I just love it. And it's
later
scary.
In his career, later in his career, he needed to get into a fight, if you know what I mean. He would always kind of start slow, and it is when someone would land on him that you'd go, oh, Robbie's here. He'd turn up at that point. And that was exactly it. He lost his first fight with Hendrix. So he fought Hendrix and lost.
Close
and then had to get back to the belt.
It was a tight fight.
It was basically like 2-2 going into the fifth round, and then Hendrix got that takedown and was able to kind of secure it. And
again, that was old rules where if you did get a takedown, that was kind of enough. So under the current rules, Robbie probably, might have won that, but
maybe.
And following on from that Hendrix fight, what a run he went on. I mean, wins over Jake Ellenberger, Matt Brown, Jimi Hendrix,
and people
which obviously
forget how hyped Jake Ellenberger was. For a brief time, Jake Ellenberger was the new truth. He had amazing wrestling, was this chunky dude, and could just had heavy hands. So beating Ellenberger and then Matt Brown was Matt Brown. He's an icon.
Phenomenal fighter. And as you say, the Johnny Hendrix one, as Voodoo Child, he that was for the belt again. That was a rematch because that was for the belt, and that is another one that was like, it's overshadowed by the McDonald 2 fight, by the Condit fight, but it's still a really good fight.
And again, it's one of those things where some people's resumes get better over time. Like Conor beating Max Holloway looks in that early fight looks so much better at the time. It was like, well, we don't know who Max is really, so it doesn't matter. Robbie's gets worse because no one remembers Jake Ellenberger. Hendricks didn't do much after that, but at the time, Hendricks had it all. He had amazing wrestling and could.
That left
hand. Who was it he fought? Was it? It wasn't Condit. It was someone.
Where he knocked him across. Campman. He done that twice. He knocked two people
and he literally slides across the map like a cartoon. Like he lands a punch on him, and the dude hits the floor and keeps going. Yeah. So it was like he was.
Yeah, dynamite in that
hand.
Hendricks, to a lot of people as well, was on the rough end of a bad decision from judges against GSP. He could have been the guy. I know, obviously, there's the Matt Serra thing, but that was almost like history righted that wrong in the rematch. But a lot of people thought Johnny Hendricks beat GSP.
I was one of them.
Yeah. And so and Johnny Hendricks, you watch those fights. It makes you have more appreciation, I think, watching these fights for Johnny Hendricks and how good he was at the time as well.
But then it was after this, he just.
It was such a slippery slope, wasn't it? It seemed to just go bad after that. And like I say, there was that sweet spot around 2014-15 where he was the man.
Well, they brought in, not long after that, the whole IV thing. And I suppose there's potential there that maybe without the IVs he wasn't good at making the weight, because then he did obviously blow up a bit and try middleweight against Paulo Costa, and that ended very, very badly for old Jimi Hendrix.
But I wonder if Robbie is the bad luck charm, because the person he lost the belt to was Woodley, who's the other example of just such a drop-off. Hendricks and Woodley, I'd say, are the two prime examples of you were the best of the best, and then you could basically get beaten by anyone. Anyone who went in there. Jake Paul could beat you. Yeah, literally.
I suppose the Woodley one did happen that bit further on. But it's true, and it's weird how sometimes that happens. You get fighters that you go, they're amazing, they're unbeatable, or they're just on this absolute tear, and then all of a sudden it's like they drop off a cliff so quickly, you're just not expecting it.
Yeah, or Ronda's a prime example of that, having losing in one of the best fights of all time, and then just dropping off a cliff.
Well, I mean, what's interesting, I'm just looking again at one of the other fights which I chose in my top 3 fights of all time. Go and listen to what the other one is. That's probably going to cause divide opinion as well. The next fight was one of the greatest fights ever, which is, in my opinion, just perfect in every way. Robbie Lawler versus Rory McDonald, obviously the rematch. It's interesting to know that was actually on the undercard. When you think that fight, you think that's got to have topped the card, but that was on the Mendes-McGregor card, I believe.
Yeah. It was the co-main.
Yeah. And, I mean...
And again, it was another one of huge excitement on my part, because as a Robbie fan, it was like... He's not headlining, but then they clearly stole the show. It was like that was what everyone was talking about. I
made my thoughts on that fight very clear in last week's episode. Talk us through your opinion on that fight.
I mean, it was iconic for both of them. I thought both of them were just astounding in it. And again, it's kind of almost weird that it ended with just McDonald crumbling, essentially, but that's also kind of perfect. It was two guys going as far as they can. I'm not going to be knocked out. You have to break me. But yeah, it was astounding. It felt like that fight wouldn't, as I was saying before, that fight wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for the first one, if you know what I mean. It felt like Rory had to have that loss, feel that fear to become the monster that you see there. He started shaving a mohawk in, and it was just a next level. It's rare that both fighters in a fight have iconic looks. Rory with just, as you were saying before, the mask of blood. And Robbie with just...
an extra
I remember
mouth.
watching that live and him going to the camera briefly and going like, what was that? What? Because they cut away quite like, what is his... What's going on? Because literally his lips hanging apart. It's split in two. It's hanging off of his face. You're like, hang on, oh my, There, look at that.
Just, oh my God.
Look at it.
If you're listening, I'm sure you've seen the picture
You've
anyway,
seen it,
but
surely, but
it's worth jumping on
astounding.
the YouTube channel just to give that a watch.
There's just so much. There's some people out there that believe the Condit fight is actually better than the McDonald fight, and I disagree with that.
Yeah, I disagree,
as much
but
as it's
good.
tight, they're both great fights. Yeah. But the imagery and almost like the storyline of the fight, the ebbs and flows, and the imagery of like that end of round 4 that we spoke about, of them staring at each other and the blood everywhere. Just watching the fight, and I think from early as like end of round 2, Rory's nose is just covering the canvas in blood consistently, and then you've got the lip, and there's just so many moments. And then I think the finish as well, just the fact that it wasn't like a big knockout blow, as you said, it was just, I can't take this anymore.
It was the crumbling
it's
and
the
holding.
crumbling. Oh, it's just...
Me and Stu were at the Bellator event when MVP landed that knee, and it was the weirdness of not someone going out cold, someone going to the mat,
Pain.
just holding their head. These fighters that, and again, in both of these instances, it's fighters you've seen do this at the highest level, so you know it's not just a bloke who's been hit and is crying. It's like to get them to turn into that broken child kind of curling in a ball is
I'm sure the
astounding,
X-ray
and
of
that was
Rory's nose probably would have looked much the same as the X-ray of Cyborg's forehead, just absolutely smashed to pieces.
Yeah.
I mean, the picture we got here, he's them in the hospital.
This is the first time I saw this as well, because I got into the UFC a bit later than you guys, and I had never seen I think a fight like that, like watching it live, and B, the aftermath of the sportsmanship of these two guys in the hospital together having a fight. Was this the first one, or is it just that this is the first one I saw?
You go back a few years and you're getting broken footage of Nick Diaz and Joe Riggs fighting in the hospital afterwards, because they were in the same ward and they're kicking off again. So it's the exact opposite of what this. But
they consistently deliver the Diaz's, don't they?
Diaz is so reliable.
But did this start that trend off? Because obviously we've seen Holloway do it with Rodriguez.
I feel like
people do this.
I feel
now.
like a GSP or someone might have had a similar thing,
course,
maybe. But then again, GSP didn't get beaten up much, so GSP probably wasn't going to hospital that often. So yeah, this could be the first one that went there. But yeah.
And then after the Condit fight, obviously he fights Tyron Woodley.
Yeah.
And
that ended quickly.
Yeah. I'm sure fans of Robbie don't want to talk about that one. But then he comes back and he beats Cowboy, loses to RDA.
And then there's the weird Ben Askren.
Oh, that's one of the ones I wanted to talk about, because it made me love Lawler all the more. Because again, as a Lawler fan, I'm fuming, because this was again meant to be a title eliminator. This was potentially or at least Askren was coming in undefeated, so the winner would possibly be in the talks again. And Lawler smashes him. People are saying you should stop Herb Dean's stop the fight, because he's beating him so badly. But Askren survives and then gets him in this choke, and Herb stops it. Herb decides that Robbie's out and he's not. And as a fan, I'm fuming. I'm like, absolute idiot. This is wrong. This should be restarted. And you see the footage, and Herb comes over and Robbie goes, I was fine. And Herb goes, I thought you were out. And Robbie goes, mistakes happen, it's all good, and gives him a hug. So in that moment, as a fan, I couldn't get to that point. As a fan, I was like, this is infuriating.
Imagine with that adrenaline going through you, and so much at risk.
And to have almost finished him as well, to be the first person to finish this undefeated, Masvidal, you'd argue a lot of his fame is that he was the one that beat Askren, that
in the
knocked out
style
Askren,
that
the
he
undefeated.
did it as well.
And this was Askren's debut, right? I think. So
and it was so short-lived, but Askren was a big name, wasn't he?
It would have been a big deal if Robbie had if it had been stopped when he was beating him, because it would have been just effortless. Dana would have loved it, because it would have been the UFC game. The UFC has always been above all these other divisions. But yeah, the fact that he'd just had all his hard work taken away from him. He wasn't out. It's the first time I'd seen that, really, where a submission a fight had been stopped when there wasn't a tap and no one was unconscious. So it was clearly a mistake. And as I said, the fact that he was instantly, it's cool, man, it's a mistake. It's not your fault. And then he turns away and he's going, fuck still. Because he's annoyed, but he's not annoyed at the person who's done this.
What a lovely man.
Astounded. Yeah, it's just amazing, right? Again, you wouldn't get that from any of his fights. You watch his actual fights, you'd think this man is probably the most horrible man in the world. Because he throws with such passion and anger. And the lovely
It's weird how many dominoes... You just make me think of how many dominoes kind of like have to fall to create like a star. Because as you say, if Herb Dean stops the fight when Robbie's winning, we don't get the Jorge Masvidal that we have now. Because as you said, it was the Masvidal win over Askren that made Masvidal the star that he is. Obviously because of the fact that he did it in 5 seconds with a flying knee.
People forget that Masvidal wasn't a knockout guy. He was a good technical boxer, but he'd win a lot of decisions. He went from street fighter to getting really good footwork and a really good technical striking game, and then after that he's this knockout artist.
Well, the whole thing with Masvidal was that didn't he go on like some kind of reality show in the jungle somewhere, and he just had moments to himself where he was like, I have to start finishing these fights, because he had a run of a few like what he thought were dodgy decisions or bad decisions or whatever it was, and he was like, I need to take it out of the hands of the judges, I need to finish fights. Insert Darren Till, boom, Ben Askren, boom, and then he gets title shots and all that, and we get the star that is Jorge Masvidal. But if Robbie Lawler gets that finish over Askren, which he maybe deserved, we don't get that.
100%.
Masvidal. It's a crazy thing.
And again, it's such a mad one that fight had a double thing. I said he deserved the stoppage, and he didn't deserve to be stopped. It's like two there. If he'd not got that stoppage and then got choked out, it'd be annoying, because as fans of Lawler, you'd be like, oh, it shouldn't have gone past the first round, though. It should have been stopped. But then it said, to have both of those things in there and him still be, it's cool, Herb. Yeah. The gold standard, you're good.
You've got pictures of Nick Diaz up here. Did you want to talk about the Nick Diaz?
Because you hate it a lot more than I do. I think both of you probably do. I don't know. I remember watching it and not being as down on it.
Oh, I remember you going, like, ringing you up and just going, oh, what a load of shit. And you was like, no, I don't think so.
Well, my reason was, again, I think it was a weird thing.
Let's just quickly say that there was obviously 2 losses to Covington and Magny before we get to this fight at middleweight as well.
And fair play to Magny.
Yeah.
But I think it's a weird thing with the Diaz's, because when Nate came through, everyone kind of remembered Nate for what Nick had done, if you know what I mean. You'd have a Nate fight and you'd be like, oh, it's a Diaz. And he wasn't at that level yet. Then when Nick retired and Nate got better and better and better, I think people remember Nate more, or Nick more, as Nate, if you know what I mean, because Nick was always in interviews looking really like he didn't want to be there. He famously,
if he was there,
he didn't turn up to the GSP one, and it was the first time that there was talk of a fight being pulled because you didn't do your media commitments, things like that. So he never seemed interested, and he always would take a little bit of time to get going and would just look, again, even in the cage, look like he doesn't want to be there. And I think that's kind of, again, don't get me wrong, it's not a classic. It's not in my top 3 fights of all time. But the first minute or two, I was like, oh, this is grim. Or maybe even the first round. But I think it was in the second round, he started to get those hands going in the way that only Nick does, where it is just flowing at different angles. And from then on, I was like, right, this is... It's 2 older guys, but yeah, it wasn't as depressing to me as it was to a lot of other people. But because I said, just seeing him get those hands going one more time was a joy.
But have you got anything you want to say about this fight?
No, the thing that I really remember is I don't think it bothered me as much as it bothered you, but I do remember he did an interview with someone for maybe ESPN or something like that, and the talk that he was giving was, to massively paraphrase, it kind of felt like, I don't want to fight, I've got no money. That was the kind of vibe I was getting, and that always makes you feel a little bit sad for fighters of the caliber of Nick, with the history of Nick and all that kind of stuff, and then to go, are you just putting yourself in loads of danger here against a guy that just epitomizes brute force and danger? Absolutely. So that was something, an issue I had with it a little bit, but yeah.
I've just looked over your shoulder, and your stats here also highlights what was cancelled before this fight. A proposed fight with Mike Perry.
That would have been
wow.
great fun.
That would have been all right, wouldn't it?
Imagine
great
that.
fun.
I pray that doesn't happen still in bare knuckle, because I don't want Robbie going and doing that.
In a strange world, Mike Perry happens to be the best in the world at something. But I mean, at that point, Perry's career was up and down in the UFC, but he comes to bang. And,
I mean, that would have been a fun one.
Definitely.
A fun one, you're right.
I think we should move on to something that Robbie Lawler did that is incredibly rare in MMA, and that is retire in such a positive, wonderful way. He fought Nico Price at UFC 290, won by knockout in the first round, and you're like, you don't see this much in MMA. There's maybe GSP, Khabib.
Yeah.
But a guy like Robbie, who's had such an up and down career, wasn't a champion, wasn't at the top of his peak of his powers, to get the send off that he got was really remarkable.
I mean, to evoke friend of the podcast, Sean Sheehan, I look forward to his next fight. But it was exactly that. It was perfect to get that, and then to get I was in tears, to get the highlight video in the octagon as he's there. Was that never happens. He fought someone who's good. Like Nico Price is a dangerous guy, so it wasn't just fed some nobody to get the win. But then, got the win, got the knockout, gave a beautiful interview. Again, I was waiting there. I was like, he's going to say the election was stolen or something rubbish through it. He didn't say anything bad still. And then, I played that to numerous people who aren't into MMA and said, try not to cry. Because him there, himself tearing up as they show this beautiful highlight video, as they're just standing there holding a mic to catch all of his tears. And
because you don't ever see that vulnerable side of Robbie, do you? You don't, and it was so rare and beautiful to see it. But also, shout out Nico Price. What a shit job. You've got Robbie Lawler's retirement fight.
It's
the whole world loves Robbie Lawler.
Literally lose-lose, isn't
it? If you beat Robbie Lawler, you're getting booed out of that octagon. What a shit job Nico Price had.
It was just so unique. I mean, only recently before that we had Frankie Edgar getting smashed to bits by Chris Gutierrez, and it was just like, you don't...
And we've seen it with numerous people.
So many people.
You look at Anderson, you look at so
Shogun.
many different... Shogun, I mean, speak like... That guy who beat Shogun, and now everyone hates him. I can't even remember his name.
He did a little dance.
Because he did a little dance to celebrate. Everyone's like, that guy's career's over. That was the epitome of the lose-lose thing that Nico Price was in there. That it's like, right, no one wants to watch him again.
Well, let's just hope in UFC 400 we don't see this happen to Jim Miller. Because that'd be bleak.
400? Jesus. He could still be going, couldn't he?
I've got. We've gone through his career. I've got a couple of questions I think I'd want definitive answers on from you. Is what is Robbie Lawler's best fight? Is it the second McDonald fight? Is it Condit? Is it something different? What's the best Robbie Lawler fight? For anyone out there that's maybe like a guy that's maybe coming during the pandemic era and is like, I didn't see the best of Robbie, show me what fight to go to.
I'm biased here, but my instinct as soon as you said that was that first fight against Atiki, because you get all of what Robbie is. The energy, like the first punch, again, in that one, is there's numerous punches he throws and misses, and you're like, he's throwing like Mike Tyson here.
Yeah.
Who is this? That absolute energy and just when he does land it and win, and then he's roaring and screaming. It's like that sums up Robbie Lawler so well. Obviously, the wars against Condit and Rory, a classic. But I'd lean towards that as just as someone who's not watched any, because it's gonna draw you in. It's only 2 rounds. I think it was a second round finish. It's gonna draw you in because you're instantly like, my God, this guy's a savage. But
there's a great bit at the end of that fight as well. I don't know, because I knew we were doing this. I watched a few extra Robbie Lawler fights that I hadn't seen before, and Tiki was one of them. And at the end of the fight, they interview both guys, which I'm always like, when a guy's been knocked out like that, but Tiki was like, well, it got stopped just because of a cut. It's like, no, mate, you got smashed. You out. He was like, no, I just got stopped because of the cut. And you can see Robbie there sort of like looking at him like, what the fuck are you talking about?
We've got multiple angles on your eyeball, my friend.
What are you talking about?
This is not just because of a cut. You were done.
If you had to throw out your favourite Lawler fight, is it McDonald
2? Yeah.
I think I'd have to go down that road. But if anyone is listening and they haven't seen it, the Carlos Condit fight is also brilliant.
It's a weird one, isn't it? Because I'd pick the Tiki fight as my Robbie Lawler fight, but if I was picking my top 3 fights, Lawler McDonald would probably be in there, and Lawler Tiki wouldn't.
Yeah.
So it's this weird thing of actual all-time fights. Yeah, that's there. But to sum up Robbie,
was there ever a fight that should have happened that never happened for Robbie?
I don't really know. I mean, he never fought GSP, right? So that would have been a nice one.
I wonder why that never happened.
He never.
I suppose he wasn't in UFC when GSP was at his prime, I guess.
So he was middleweight champion Elite XC when Anderson would have been champ in a middleweight champion UFC. So that would have been interesting. But you do feel at that point Anderson would have just gently moved out the way of every punch and patted him on the head and knocked him out in some way, in some elaborate manner.
Absolutely.
What about, I mean, I was just thinking this more from a modern standpoint. Would it have been fun to get Masvidal Lawler even later on? Because they were both not too dissimilar ages, right? Like,
I would have been interested in
fight.
that. Again, you then have your kind of, that was really the era of you don't fight people in your own camp, because Matt Hughes Lawler would have been, at that point, they were both absolute beasts, both redneck monsters kind of thing. That would have been a lot of fun. But yeah, I think the fights that are his iconic ones aren't necessarily ones that beforehand anyone was like, oh, this is the big, like him v McDonald, particularly the first and even the second. I don't think anyone was like, oh, this is the classic rivalry. They made it that.
Yeah.
And Condit as well. They made it that, and yeah,
and just
all the better for it.
That run as well, I think it's a 13-month period between the second Johnny Hendricks fight, which was a classic where he won the belt, then the Rory fight, and then the Condit fight. And it's like all 3 of them are like fight of the year winner, if not contenders.
Yeah.
And this in a 13-month period. It's absolutely mental.
And again, it's bearing in mind as well that it's in his second stint in the UFC. That's what makes it all the more beautiful. It's not just some up-and-coming guy. It's some kid who came in as a nobody, slipped up, then went away for years. And again, at that point, you didn't think anyone from Strikeforce was going to end up in the UFC. Your Bellators, all these other things, you didn't expect it to come together at any point. So to get back and to do that climb, Orlovsky was similar. When he was getting close to getting a title shot again, it was like, oh my God, because he was the first like heavyweight champ I saw and was excited about.
Yeah.
And Verdum as well, who did it. He was the champ and then went away and came back and became champ again. But yeah, those things are weirdly, you can get more invested and it's more of a beautiful story because it's not just, oh, this guy's just blessed.
Yeah.
This guy's just unbeatable. A Khabib, it's like, well, it's because he's Khabib.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. With Robbie, it was like, no, he's gone up, he's gone down, and then to get there and get the belt. And as said, with 3 classic fights in a row. I should have come on and done my top 3 fights and picked them 3.
Yeah.
And it would have just been a Robbie Lawler. It would have just been a Robbie Lawler episode. Here's the 3.
And I mean, let's before we wrap things up, like, I mean, if people want to listen to your episode with Rory McDonald on the Distraction Pieces podcast, that's an absolutely fine listen. I couldn't believe it because that was a long time ago now, wasn't it? When you had Rory on,
it was when he was in Bellator. He'd walked out of the UFC, and there was a lot of he was one of the first big names to walk away from his UFC re-signing and went to Bellator. See, I had Rory on. I've had Dan Hardy on a few times. Mark Goddard,
because
MVP.
To talk to the listeners and Blake a little bit about how you met Mark Goddard, because it was quite an interesting story, that, right?
Yeah, or Mark and Dan, really. So I met Dan on going on shows with similar studios to this when the UFC was on Setanta, and Dan did a show on there, and when it was on, and then it moved to BT, and I went on and did some interviews and stuff like that. So me and Dan hit it off there, and then I met Mark properly. I'd met him at events, kind of over the railings, but I went to his MMA refereeing and judging course with John Gooden, actually. We were both there on that day. And it was amazing to get like a bigger understanding of the score. And I'd love to do it again, but it feels like the system's changing almost constantly. So it's let's let them get it settled, and then I'll go and do the course again and fully understand
the latest one is the whole grounded opponent rule. Looks like it might be changing, and hopefully, I think for the better. But
which would be good. But I did that course, and it was a 1 day thing at that point with a lunch break in the middle. You had the morning session and the evening session, and it was amazing to learn the ins and outs of it because, I think it improves your enjoyment of the sport, and it means that because I was guilty of arguing stuff online or arguing decisions or whatever, that I don't actually know the rules. And again, I mentioned Sean Sheehan earlier. His judging video is fantastic for that as well. I'd be arguing because I've heard Rogan say that this doesn't really count or that doesn't really count. He's like, oh no, that's not in the rules at all. So to get that proper insight into how things are scored, because I don't see a lot of point in arguing how you'd like it to be scored or how you think it should be scored. It's like in a football match, I think we should have won. We were the better team. Oh yeah, but you lost. Yeah, but we were the better team. Cool, but you lost. That's the same in this. It's like, I don't think it should be scored like that. Yeah, but it is. So that's how it's scored. There's no argument in what you prefer to see.
Yeah.
We can't. Yeah, if you don't want any wrestling and grappling, go and watch kickboxing, Stu.
Yeah. Mr. Stand 'em up.
But yeah. And so that was great.
I remember, obviously, way back when he was on an absolute tear over in Bellator as well. You had MVP on your podcast.
Yeah.
And I mean, they're just the fighters you've had on. I mean, you've had literally everyone and their dad on the podcast, including Mr. Harrison here.
Yeah.
And
everyone and their dads. Mr. Harrison and his dad.
And people can go and check out Distraction Pieces on wherever any platform that you can get your podcasts on.
And that MVP chat was great because he hadn't had loads of interviews at that point, and it was one of the first times I kind of put to him, like, people say that, you should get your hands up and stuff, and you should defend more because you're going to get knocked out. And he had just such a perfect argument for it. It was like, people, like you watch the UFC at the weekend, people with their hands up are getting knocked out every week. I've not been knocked out yet, so I'll keep doing it until if I get knocked out, maybe I'll start thinking I'll get my hands up. But so far, it's working good. It's not like having your hands up stops you getting knocked out. He's like, this is working. So it was just the perfect argument to go, actually.
So excited to see him in the UFC. Fair. I can't wait to see what's going to happen.
Holland.
Great matchmaking there.
Really good matchmaking.
Really good one. Look, I think we should end on one last question.
Do it.
What have you got?
Is Robbie Lawler the most exciting fighter of all time?
I think he might be, right?
We
were speaking about dream matches. Lawler in his prime against Gaethje in his prime.
Oh my God!
Imagine that, because the only person that came to mind then was Gaethje as the alternative of most exciting, because Gaethje is consistently that exciting. But he's younger. Lawler, the only argument you'd have against it is things like the Diaz fight, that you start to go a bit. And he did get a bit gun shy. It felt he couldn't pull the trigger as frequently. But that's as he's got older, and then he erased all that with that Nico Price win. So I'd say he's arguably the most exciting fighter of all time. You've got arguments either way, haven't you? So Anderson Silva you'd throw in, and then you've got his fight against Damian Maia and things like that, and Talas Laters that people were booing throughout. So it's like,
to make it a more streamlined conversation, I think you could say, is he the most exciting champion of all time? So obviously Gaethje's never been a champion. We've had
please respect the BMF title. Please respect the BMF title.
I'm so sorry. I can't wait for him to defend it. I genuinely can't though. Holloway
it's going to be amazing.
I mean, Holloway's probably up there as a really exciting champion. Also, the Charles Oliveira run.
Yeah,
but I just
completely agree.
That 13-month period that we just mentioned, winning the belt off Hendricks and then McDonald and Condit.
And it's the gauge in excitement, isn't it? Because again, people kind of erase how exciting it was to see how quickly Ronda would win in that period where she was just steamrolling people. It was genuine, as Blake was saying the other week. It was so good for the sport because she was getting on all these TV shows that you wouldn't. I was going to say that Lawler wouldn't get on. You wouldn't want Lawler on them. No. It'd be a terrible advert for the sport. He's so quiet and mild-mannered and whatnot. So, yeah. But, yeah, I mean, just bang for your buck. The way he throws, the excitement when he misses is still there because he throws with such ferocity.
I like furiosity.
Yeah,
There's fury and ferocity. Furiosity.
Exactly.
That could be the name of a new UFC guy. UFC 300. Furiosity.
Oh no, that's going to be the name of a Tyson Fury event in Saudi.
It'll get cancelled, don't worry.
Yeah, easy.
Oh, well, look, thanks ever so much for coming on.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
It's been absolutely lovely. Go follow Distraction Pieces wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching this, click the little subscribe button underneath. And other than that, we'll be back next time.
Back next time.
Oh, just quickly, shout out to Johnny Fisher, former guest of the show, put in an incredible performance at the weekend. Made his Vegas debut and looked absolutely terrifying.
He showed a lot of furiosity.
He showed so much furiosity
in Vegas.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Bosh. Right, we'll see you next time.
Bye.